Let me give you a little background for myself. I have been in the nonprofit industries for more than 15 years, and as a finance instructor for 10 years. During my tenures at Open Signals, I developed the budgets and managed the accounting departments, which is including financial reportings and policy developments. In addition to my accounting backgrounds, I also certified in human resources. I graduated from Portland State University with an accounting degree. I currently live in Portland, Oregon, and when I am not busy at work, I like hiking and baking for my family. This is the agendas for today's sessions. I know that we have a lot to cover, but I'll make sure to have some time for questions. Why do we need a budget? Budget is a very crucial tool for success organizations. It's crucial because it helps us plan for the futures. It can also help us evaluate the organization's financial health by comparing the actual expenses to the budgets. The other important tool that we can use the budget for is it also provides the accountabilities. When there's a budget, people are more conscious on their spendings. Now, what should you include in your budget? You should include all your revenue sources, this including the government grants, private foundations, fundings, individual donors, fundraising events, and miscellaneous revenues. When doing your budgets, you want to include all the expenses for the programs, fundraising areas, and then the general admins. It is very important that you do the budgets by programs, because as an individual, you should manage the individual program. The programs should manage their revenue and expenses. That way, it provide the accountabilities for the programs. And you should always think up to budget. The budget have a surplus at the end of the fiscal years. In the past, a lot of organizations think that they should have a balanced budget. This is not the case anymore. With the balanced budget, you cannot build up your reserve amount for your future's capital expansions. A healthy financial organization should have at least 3 to 6 months of the total expense in their reserve accounts. And I see some organizations that are very aggressive. They have 9 months of reserve. Now, the next slide I'm going to talk about is the priorities for your budgets. It is very important that you know what are your priorities for next year's in order to be successful. These items include staffing. You need to know what talents that you need to make the program to be successful. And for your staffing needs, you also need to understand that your staff also need to make a living. The detail for that will be including an increase in wages, a COLA increase, and what are the benefits that would attract your staff. The items that the added priority is you need to know what investment that the organization will make for short-term and long-term. This will help to build up your sustainabilities and your infrastructures. The very important item that you need to consider when doing the budget is you need to know that the budget should support the organization's strategies and goals. So when you do the budgets, refer to the strategic planning that had already written for that fiscal years and work your budgets to support those goals. In your budget, you always want to include all your needs and all your wants for next fiscal year. That way, for next fiscal year, if something comes up, that will be something nice to have for the staff or for the sustainabilities of the organizations. You can always have that fundings ready for you to go. The other thing that very, very important is when doing fundraising budget, make sure that let the funding follow your programs. What I mean by that is, since the programs is already developed, the fundraising need to go out and seeking funds to support those programs, not the other ways around. Here's a little flow chart that I created for the budgeting process. The very first important step is write it down. You want to document the process, have it somewhere that people can refer to. If the process is only in one person's head, if that person is no longer with the organizations, then you will lose all the important information for the budgets. And then you also need to redevelop the process. The second step is you need to decide who should be involved in the process and when they should be involved. My suggestion is to get the programs people to be involved so they know that the budget, they know their budgets for next fiscal years. Get the fundraising people involved so they know that what to raise to support the programs and the organization's goal. You also want to include the executive directors because the budgets need to support the organizational goals and strategies. And this person, the executive directors, had the bigger pictures for that. The next step to that would be you want to establish a timeline. The benefits of establishing a timeline is that it allows each party enough time to prepare the budgets. The date for the board to, you want to target the approval date for the board to approve is 2 months before the fiscal years. This will allow you to have enough time to change the budget if it's necessary. And you want to make sure that everyone's agree on the goal for next fiscal years. This including the priorities for the programs. They also need to agree on the organization's financial goals, which is agrees on the percentage of the reserve that we need to build up this fiscal years. And also, it needs to support that the annual goals for the strategic plan. So everyone needs to know that there is a goal that we need to meet for next fiscal years, and the budgets need to support those. It is very important that everyone's agree on the goal. The other piece of the process is understanding the current financial situations. The best way to do that is review the actual versus the budget statements so you know what your financial situation is. This statements allow you to see the detail line items and also the summary line items, which is you can evaluate which items need to be increased or decreased or stay the same for next fiscal year. Once you have an understanding of that, the spendings, try to do the forecast for the expense for the entire year, for the remaining of the years. That way you will have a better understanding your budget for next year, that what budgets that you need to have for next fiscal years. The other step that following this understanding your situation is agree on the budget's approach. This is very important because everyone you need to agree on a certain levels for that approach to have the process moving smoothly. You need to assign a specific task to anyone that is involved. And also, everyone needs to agree on who has the authority to make decisions on the budgets. And also need to be agrees on how much uncertainty that we can have in our budgets for next year. The very last item need to be agreed on is what is the percentage of revenues that we can put away for the reserve. Once you have all the agreements set up, then you can move on to the next step. This step is that you need to make sure that your budget line items are in sync with your accounting systems. The structures of your operating budgets should match your accounting system chart of account. This way, it provides efficiencies when you implement the budgets into the systems. And it also allows you to run the profit and loss statements, which is it should match with your variance, and the budget should match with those statements. The other steps in the process is that you need to develop worksheets and templates. This templates including the detailed revenues templates. This revenue detail should include grant funding, private contributions, events, programs revenues. You also need to have a detailed worksheets for contribute revenues, a list of previous donors, what are their repeated donations are, and that way you have a list of known factors for the revenues. Once you have a list of the known factors revenues ready, you can move on to the unknown factors, which is the fundraising events, individual small donors. Once your revenue is completed, you can move on to develop your expense draft budgets. In the expense areas, you want to determine the total cost for your program to reach their goals. And you also need to include the expenses for the organization, the total cost for their to reach the organization's goal and strategy for next year. Once you have that ready, you can move on to review the draft budgets. Make sure the draft budgets meets your program's organization goals. When reviewing, you need to discuss all the assumptions and write those assumptions down. Make sure that everyone's understand what are the assumptions in the budgets. If it's necessary, make the adjustments based on the goals and capacities to match the incomes and expense during this phase. Once you have all the details and ready, review the final draft budgets again to make sure that you have accounted everything that you wanted to account for next fiscal years. The other step in this process is to approve the budgets. You need to present the draft budget to the finance committees and have a discussions at the finance committees. And also, you also want to present the budget to other committees. Once the finance committees approve the budgets, you can move the draft budget to the board for approval. Once the budget has moved to the board for approval, you want to make sure to document your budget decisions. You want to create a consolidated budget spreadsheets and files where you have includes all your assumptions, all your need for next fiscal years, what are the wants that you have included in your budgets. That way everybody had that documentations when they need to refer to the budgets again. The very last process in the budgets is to implement the budgets. You want to incorporate the budgets into the accounting systems. That way you can run the report from the accounting system easily to compare the budgets to the actual expenses. And it's a very, very powerful statement that you can use is the budget to actual. That way you can always evaluate what are your expenses at and how much budgets that you still have for remaining of the fiscal years. And the next slides I'm going to talk about is how to do a budget, where to start first. So my recommendation is always start with the revenues first and then move to expenses. We want to start with revenue first because we know how much we have to work with. And started with the known revenue source first, like the repeated contributions. What are the remaining grants that we have to spend from the prior years? Once you have the known factors identified, then you can move on to the unknowns, like the estimate for fundraising events, for small individual donor, how much we can get from those donors. Once you have the revenue set up and you know how much revenue you have to work with, you can move to the expenses area. I personally like to do my budgets on a conservative level. So on the revenue side, I always budget at the lower end and my expense at the higher ends. The tool that I use to evaluate how much expense I need for next year is I always use the actual to budgets statements. That way I can see very clearly that which line item that need to be increased and why we need to be increased for next fiscal year, or which item need to be decreased and why we don't need that money in that line item for this fiscal year, so I can have a better projection for next fiscal years. I always want to do my budgets to have a surplus. That way I can build up my expenses. I mean, my reserve account, and also I can use the funding for future capital expansions or some unknown event that happen in the next fiscal year that I will have the funding for. Remember, the budget is a living document. You can always change it. Once you know your new expense, if there's new expense comes in or new revenue comes in, you can always either decide to change your budgets quarterly, every 6 months. I personally like to do a 6 months time frame because 6 months it has passed and it gives me enough data to evaluate my situations, my financial situation at that time, so I can have a better understanding how to project for next for the remaining of the fiscal years. Some people has asked me, what should I use as a guidance for budgets? I always use the profits and loss statement by month. That give me a summaries of my financial situations. And as for preparing the budgets, I like to use the profit and loss statement details by month. That way I can see my line item for individual line items, their the status of my expenses, how much I already spent for that line item, and how much budgets I still have for that line item. So I can do a better projection for next fiscal years. And some newer organization, they might not have the profit and loss statements. But you can use the prior year's Form 990s. The Form 990 structures the way that it has a column for program expenses, a column for fundraising expenses, and also a column from general admins. This is the structure that when you run the profits and loss statements by individual months by program, it'll give you all those detailed informations on there. The next slides, I'm going to give you a small examples for what a budget should look like. And here's the templates that I developed. So as you can see at the top of the screen, at the top of the templates, I have the revenue listed first with the detailed revenue sources. And the column size, I have program totals, G&A, which is the general admin columns, and the fundraisings. I recommend that you do your programs, do your budgets by programs. That way you can easily see your program budgets. And then once you have the program budgets completed, you can roll those programs budget into the total program column on this template. So it gives you a summary, which you can also use this summary to present to the board. And at the bottoms of this template, I have all the details expenses listed, which is personnel expenses, professional, occupancy, insurance, supplies, all the expenses that you might have in your organizations, you want to put it on here. And then you get the total for expenses and revenue, and then you do the math to get either a surplus budgets or deficit budgets. When you have a deficit budget, you need to make sure that you understand why there is a deficit. And also make sure that your board can accept that deficit for the next fiscal years. It is very important to get the buy-in from your board. The reason for that your board needs to agree on the budget is because they need to support the fundraising goals and they need to participating in the fundraising in order to support the organizations. The very, very important thing is because they also had a fiduciary responsibility for the organizations. What do you need to present to the board meeting to get their buy-in? You will need to present the summary of the budgets. You don't need to do the detail because the board doesn't need to know all the operating detail and how you get to that numbers. So they just want to see the summaries. And you also need to provide the fundraising goals, which is they also need to support in reaching that goals to support the programs. You also need to include the organization's short-term and long-term goals so they can understand why you need to do the budgets the way you are doing, you're presenting. If there's any expansions in the next fiscal year, you want to document it and you want to make sure that they are aware of that expansions. Now, the next slide, I'm going to ask you a couple questions to make sure that you know if your accounting system is capable for you to track your revenue and expenses. You need to figure out if your accounting structures allow you to track revenue and expenses by programs, by revenue source, which is those are the grant fundings, especially those restricted funds. You want to make sure that your system is able to track those and you can print out a report easily to make sure that your expenses in compliance with your grants. And it also allows you to track your expenses by types, by special events. The special event is a little bit tricky. You want to make sure that it includes all the revenue. It allows you to include all the revenue and all the expenses and also provide you a net profit and loss for the special events. The other item that you want to consider for your accounting system is, will your accounting system allow you to run the budget to actual report by programs? Allow you to run the reports by grants? The other part would be, can different departments get their own reportings? That way, if the departments can get their reporting, they don't need to go bother the finance persons all the times. What are the money they still have and what are the expenses that they have already incurred? Which is, with this capability in your accounting system, it releases a lot of the burdens from the finance department. That's all I have for this morning. Do you have any questions?
Thank you so much, Leslie, for presenting this morning. We really appreciate the information, sort of giving a refresher overview of what it takes to create a thoughtful budget. So if anybody has any questions after this presentation, they can direct them to myself, Diana at healthjusticerecovery.org, and I can pass them along to Leslie and she can help answer those questions. Just a few things about Health Justice Recovery Alliance. Just a reminder, we're here to help Measure 110 service providers be successful in their organization in terms of organizational development, capacity. And we have a technical assistance program to help any of our organizations that may need additional support, assistance. So if you have any needs that have come up for you, we would love to match you with a consultant, and it can be in a variety of organizational and administrative needs, or it can be Measure 110 specific around quarterly reporting or budget or policies and procedures. So feel free to reach out to us. And then we're hoping to do another workshop later this month on job hiring and descriptions. So please tune in for that. And if there aren't any other last minute things, Leslie, that you want to say, then we'll adjourn for today.
So if you have any question regarding the budget, just make sure that you just contact us and we'll make sure that you get your questions answered.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Diana.
Yeah, thank you so much, Leslie. Thank you everybody for watching this video. Bye-bye.